Just so happens my message today is on trust, and I'm trying to decide if I told Justin what I was talking on or not, because that song just kind of fits right into what we're talking about today, as we're talking about the journey of the Israelites. We're following the journey of the Israelites as they travel from Egypt to Canaan. Last week we looked at Exodus chapter 18, where Moses' father-in-law Jethro came to visit and brought Moses his wife and sons. Jethro stayed for a few days, and he gave Moses some great advice, and then he returned home. Shortly after Jethro's departure, God moved the Israelites once again, and that's where we pick up the story today in Exodus chapter 19. It says, on the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before him all the words that the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. Moses had been to this place before. When I read this passage, it sounds like Moses is pretty excited about being back here. The first thing he does once the Israelites set up camp, or possibly even while they're still setting up camp, is he starts running up the mountain because he's been there. He knows that God is on this mountain. Well, actually, God is everywhere, but Moses, wasn't quite as knowledgeable as we are. He remembers that he had talked to God 3 months earlier, possibly 4 months earlier, on this same mountain. God spoke to him from a burning bush, and that's still fresh in his mind. He says, if I could just get back to that same spot, I can have another God encounter. Maybe God will talk to me through the same bush. So in my mind, I see him looking for the exact spot where he met with God previously. He thinks if he can get back there, he might have a repeat of the miraculous event that had happened 4 months ago. But before Moses reaches his destination, God stops him. See, usually God's leading him. This time, apparently God didn't tell him to come up the mountain yet, because God stops him before he even gets there. So wait. You're getting ahead of me. You need to go back and you need to talk to the people before you can come. Actually, Moses makes 10 trips up the mountain. Can you imagine that? 80 years old. And in the course of a short period of time, he actually makes 10 trips up and down the mountain as God gives him instructions. But before he gets there, God says, stop, go back. You need to talk to the people. This is what you need to tell them. And he says, you need to tell them that they need to trust me, is essentially what he's saying. God starts by saying, remind them of everything they've seen me do. Remind them of all the miracles that I performed in Egypt, of how I got Pharaoh's attention and freed them from Pharaoh. Remind them of all the miracles I performed for them since they've left Egypt. Remind them how I opened the Red Sea so they could walk across. Remind them how I fed them with manna and quail. Remind them of how I provided water on several occasions when there was no water or no suitable drinking water here in the desert. Remind them of everything that I've done, and then challenge them. Say, now that you've seen what I can do, if you will trust me enough to follow me, if you will trust me enough to obey everything that I command, no questions asked. If I say it, you just do it. And you've seen what I can do. Will you trust me? And if you obey my commands, you will be my treasured possession. I will provide for you. I will care for you. I will rescue you from your enemies. All you've got to do is trust me enough to do what I command you to do. And I want you to notice the response of the people. It says, all of them in chorus together said, we will do everything the Lord has said. Not the things that we like, not the things that suit us. They said, we will do everything the Lord has said. Now that response is easy if we simply take it at face value. They said, everything the Lord has said. How much has the Lord said up to this point? How many rules has he given them to follow? How many commands has he given them? There's really been nothing up to this point. And so they say, we will do everything he has said. That's really not what God was asking. See, God's getting ready to give them the rules. Moses is going to go up on the mountain where he's going to receive the 10 commandments and all of the other rules and regulations that God's going to have. What God's actually asking is, do you trust me enough? After you've seen what I can do you trust me enough that you will trust that I know what's best for you? Will you trust me enough that when Moses comes back with these rules, you won't argue about them? Do you trust me enough with your life that you will commit right now to do whatever? Because you don't know what it's going to be yet. But do you trust me enough that you will do whatever I ask you to do? And I'm not sure the people totally really understood that, because they had that word has. We will do everything he has commanded. But what God was asking was for a commitment for forever. Will you trust me before you even know what it is? Will you trust me? Sometimes we hold back from God because we want to know what's in it for us. Or we want to know exactly what we're going to have to give up, or what we're going to have to change. We want to read the fine print and know exactly what we're getting into. But God doesn't play that game. God operates on his own terms. This is essentially the same promise that God made to Abraham 800 years earlier. Abraham didn't know where God was leading him. He didn't know what problems were ahead or what sacrifices he would be asked to make. He simply put his trust in God and held on to the promise that if he listened to and obeyed God, God would keep the promise that he had made to him. God just said, Moses, just follow me. I'm going to lead you to this new place. He didn't even pull out pictures or bring it up on the internet. Here, this is where you're going. Isn't this a great place? He just said, trust me, Abraham. If you trust me and follow me, I promise I won't let you down. You're going to love this place I take you. And Moses said, okay, God. And he took off and he followed God. He didn't say, God, let me read the contract first. He said, yes, God, I will trust you. I will follow you. And if we read the Bible, it's very clear that Moses it was because of his actions. He had the faith, he had the trust first, but because of the trust, because of the faith, he put it into action. And that's why he was considered righteous. Would Abraham have agreed to go if God had told him that years down the road he would be asked to sacrifice his son? I don't know, but I doubt it. Would you follow this person you don't really know that well yet? I mean, God just appeared to him. He had never even met God, and God just appears and says, hey, I'm going to make you a promise. You don't know me yet, but I'm asking you to put your trust in me, and if you'll simply follow me, I will take you to this land, and I will make you a great nation. I'm going to bless you, but you have to put blind faith in me. Oh, but let me tell you, you're going to have a son, and I'm going to ask you to sacrifice your son. I doubt if Abraham would have followed. But because God had proved himself over and over along the way, Abraham followed God. He simply did it, and it started out with small things. So when it finally got to that big thing of being asked to sacrifice his son, Abraham by that time trusted God enough. He said, okay, God, I don't understand this. I don't like this. But yes, God, you've proven yourself to me. So I trust you with my son. But it started out with simply, will you trust me? Will you follow? That's what God's asking of the Israelites. He's saying, will you trust me even when you don't understand? Will you trust me even when it doesn't make sense? Will you simply commit right now? We're in this for whatever. See, really what God's asking for is not a contract. He's asking for a covenant. God says, let me tell you what I'm going to do for you. Now, there were some terms, but it wasn't terms based on, a regular contract. In a regular contract, you're always looking, okay, if they violate this, then I'm free from my contract. See, God's saying, I will love you. You will be my people. I have chosen you. But to get that, all you have to do is you have to stay with me. If you walk away, you lose out. And it's really not my punishment. It's simply you're walking away. I can't protect you if you're walking away from me. I will covenant with you to be your God. But you have to want me to be your God. I'm not going to force it on you. At any time, you can walk away. And when you do, I will be there, and I will try to draw you back, and I will be there if you come back. However, for the period of time that you're not following me, you will be out from under my protection. That's the covenant I'm making. Stay with me, and you'll have all the blessings that I want to give you. God knows our future. He knows where we need to go. He promises to bless us and take care of us. He knows that on our own, we will blow it. On our own, we'll never obtain the best that he has for us. He tries to bring us to a place where we realize that we aren't smart enough to figure it out on our own, and then says, okay, now you know that you can't do this. And you've seen what I can do. So will you trust me? Will you just commit whatever God says? I will do. In 3 months, God has shown Israel what he's capable of. He's led them into situation after situation where there's nothing that they could do on their own. He's brought them to a place of desperation, and then he's provided for them in miraculous ways. He knows that more struggles are coming. They're not done with their struggles yet. We're never done with our struggles until we're free from this life. There will always be more struggles. But he says, will you trust me when those struggles come? Will you trust me even when you don't understand? Will you simply make a covenant with me right now? You will stick with me. When we do wedding vows, it's in better or worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health. Forsaking all others, I give myself to you. We don't know what the future is going to be, but we say it doesn't matter. I am covenanting with you, and we're going to do this together. Wherever he leads, will they trust him enough to do what he commands, even when it would be easier or more comfortable to do something else? Moses had already made that kind of commitment, but the people haven't arrived at that place yet. They still want things to be on their terms. We'll follow as long as it's easy. We'll follow as long as we don't have to give up too much. We'll follow until we no longer like what we're being asked to do. God's not interested in a bargaining agreement. There's not going to be a union contract that can be changed when we don't like it anymore and want something different. God makes the terms as he sees fit, and we either decide to accept God's terms or walk away from them. But when we walk away from the terms, we also walk away from the promises. God says, I will bless you as long as you stay with me. But you have to choose to stay with me. What God's essentially saying is, I want to be king. I want to be Lord. And as king and Lord, I will make the rules. I will not force myself on you, but I will make this promise to you. If you follow me completely and make me Lord, I will protect you. I will bless you. I will provide for you. This is the first time in history that a grouping of people as a nation is not based on race. Now you say, oh yes it was the Israelite nation. Now God made this to the people that were there at that time. All of them were not descendants of Jacob. It's simply thrown out to the whole group. It's based on a vow of faith. If you, as a group, well, individuals, but also as a group, if you will follow me. It is true that most of them were related. Most of them were descendants of Jacob, but they're not all from Jacob. Joseph had taken an Egyptian bride. So Joseph's descendants through his Egyptian bride were part of this group. They were all not true, full-blood Israelites. They weren't even called that yet, but some of them were half-breeds or quarter-breeds or whatever. Moses had married a Midianite, Zipporah. She's part of this group that God's saying, will you trust me? Will you follow me? It's to the group, not just to those who have the right blood. Later, Moses is going to take another wife. She's going to be Ethiopian. The promise is to her. Even though she's coming in later, she has to make that same commitment. Yes, I will follow the commands that God gives. When Joseph's brothers came to Egypt, they brought with them many slaves and servants. They had many children. They weren't sons of Abraham, but they were part of the group that exited Egypt. In fact, if we read the account when they left, it talks about those that left. 600,000 descendants of Jacob, men. 600 male descendants of Jacob above age 20, then plus their wives and children. Then it says, and there were many others also. It doesn't say how many, but it says there were many others also that went with them. So this community of people included more than just Israelites. And God made the same promise to all of them. If you will simply trust me, if you will obey my commands, do what I tell you to do, then you will be part of my chosen people. Of course, later in the New Testament, it really extends to us. We are all descendants of Abraham when we decide to follow God. God's promise to Abraham was that he would be the father of many nations. We are part of that because we are kind of adopted into Abraham's family when we come to faith. When we make a commitment to Christ, we become part of the promise that God is making here. If you will obey everything that I command, if you will stay with me, you will have my blessings. You will have my protection. Father Abraham had many sons. I am one of them, and so are you, or one of the daughters. Moses has already made the decision himself, but he couldn't make the decision for the people. Each person had to decide on their own whether or not they would accept this covenant that God is offering. I want to be your God. In the Bible, it talks about us being chosen. God had already chosen them. God said, I want you to be my people. I want to be your king. I want to be your protector and your provider. But will you choose me? I've already chosen. Will you choose? And we read that all the people accepted God's offer. They all said, we will obey. We will do everything that the Lord has said. But once the actual commands are given, will they keep their commitment? Or will they say, I don't like that one. I'm going to obey the rest of them, but not that one? Will they decide they know more than God does? Right now they say, yeah, God, you've proven yourself. We trust you. But no, God, that doesn't sound right. That's not a wise decision, God. God, that's not the way things work. You got to get a clue, God. We're not going to listen to that because it doesn't make sense or we don't like it. Now, of course, we already know the answer to the question. Because we read, as we keep reading, many times when the children of Israel walked away and didn't keep the commands that God gave. In fact, in just a few days, they're going to be worshiping a golden calf. In days to come, their trust will again be tested. They will once again grumble and complain instead of believing that God will take care of them. At Mount Sinai, the talk was good, but talk is cheap. Our actions speak louder than words. And it's our actions that show whether or not we really trust God. Abraham was commended because of his faith, but his faith was put into action. It's easy to say we trust God. But what do we do when our faith is tested? What do we do when we're faced with a decision we have to make a choice? This is what God says, but this is what my friends say. This is what God says, but this is what society says. This is what God says, but this is what the law says. This is what God says, but this is what I want to do. That's when we see, do we really trust God? Obedience has been the issue since the beginning of time. It started with Adam and Eve. They didn't fully trust God, so they disobeyed the one command that he had given them. Don't you wish there was only one command? But they couldn't even follow that one. They didn't trust God enough to believe that he had the best for them. So they said, okay, we don't trust God. God must be just trying to hold something back from us, so we're going to do what we want to do. When they disobeyed, they lost the provision and blessing that were part of the terms of the covenant. Abraham proved his faith by being obedient, following God, even when he didn't understand. Obedience to God was the issue then, and obedience to God is the issue today. We claim to love God. We claim to believe God, but talk is cheap. Are we putting our words into action? Are we being obedient to everything that God requires? Or are we picking and choosing the ones that we like? God has not yet given the rules that he expects the Israelites to follow, but he asks for their commitment to follow the rules when they are given. It says, you don't know yet what I'm going to require, but do you trust me enough that you will commit now to obeying those things? If you follow me, you will have my blessing. It's your choice. You can live with my blessing or you can live without it. I want to bless you, but you have to stay with me to get that blessing. It was really no different in the New Testament. Jesus asked the disciples to follow him. He didn't give them a manual. He just saw these fishermen. He said, hey, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. What does that even mean? Do you trust me enough to follow me? And it says they left everything and they followed Jesus. They didn't explain it to us first. What are we going to be required to do? They simply went. He went by a tax collector's booth and said, give up your taxes. Come follow me. And Matthew got up and simply followed Jesus. Jesus never lays it all out. He just says, do you trust me? If you trust me, will you follow me? I'll teach you as we go along. But simply trust me enough that if I ask you to do something, it's for your best interest. And don't argue with me about it. If you trust me, simply do it because you trust that I've got your life in my hands and that I will give you what is best. There isn't one person in this room, myself included, that knows everything that God will require of you in the future. I don't know what God's going to ask me to do in the future. But it doesn't matter. I'm covenanting with God that God, whatever it is, no matter how tough it is, even if I don't like it, God, I trust you because you've proven yourself in the past. Now, maybe some of you are here and you're not in that place yet. He hasn't had a chance to prove himself. Well, you're going to have to make a decision from what you've heard about God. Will you put your trust in him? He asks for commitment first. Will you trust me? Why should he tell you what to do if you're not going to trust him when he does tell you? Simply trust me. Do we trust God enough to know that whatever he asks is for good reason and for our best? The Israelites are off to a good start here, at least in word. They have a willingness at this point to obey, and that's where it starts. If we're not willing to obey, we'll never start the journey. But once we've started, we also need to be willing to listen. Because it's easy to say, yes, God, I'll do anything you tell me to do. No, I can't hear you. If we're going to trust and do what he says to do, then we need to be listening to what he asks us to do. Too many people have selective hearing when it comes to listening to God. They're only responsible for the things that they hear and understand. There are many people who don't read their Bible because they're afraid they're going to read something they don't like. And once I read it, then I'm going to be required to do it. So if I simply don't read it, then I don't know about it. And we're like, well, God, I didn't know that. Why do you think he gave you the book? So you can. And if we really want to follow his commands, we will want to know what his commands are. We will say, okay, God, I want to follow your commands because I want to have that blessed life. Thank you, God, for giving me the commands so I can see what they are. But once we see it, then we need to do our best to understand it. We say, well, I read that, but I don't understand what it is, so I guess I'll forget one because I don't understand it. Well, then we need to pray for understanding. We need to rely on the Holy Spirit to help us understand it. You know, when we get to heaven and God says, why didn't you do that? Well, I didn't understand it, so I just forgot about it. Well, did you try to understand it? Well, no, because, I didn't like it anyway, so I figured if I didn't understand it, then listen and try to understand. Instead of ignoring something we don't understand or don't like, we should make an effort to understand it. James chapter 1, verse 5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all, without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Well, yeah, I read that, but I don't understand it. So, God, I don't really understand what this says. God, will you reveal it to me? Will you help me to understand it? Because I want to obey your commands fully. Please teach me what this says. Ask God for wisdom. I think more often than not, it's not that we don't understand, though. Sometimes we blame it on it and say, well, I didn't understand it, or I didn't understand why. I didn't know why it was. I know God said that, but I just didn't agree that that was important. I don't think it's that we don't understand. I think it's that we don't like what we hear. So we pretend to not understand. If we're willing to obey, we must be willing to listen. And then once we've heard, we must be willing to obey again. Okay, I'm willing to listen. Okay, I heard that. Yeah, I don't like it, but yeah, God, I'm willing because I made a promise. Yeah, I will do it. Being willing to obey is not a one-time decision. It's a daily decision. Today, I will trust. Today, I will obey. I made that commitment yesterday or last month or last year or 10 years ago or 50 years ago. But today, I make that decision again. Yes, I will trust you. Yes, I will follow. In the next 10 chapters of Exodus, God begins to write out the rules that he expects them to follow. First, he got the commitment. We will follow the rules, whatever they are. Then he lays them out. And we're not going to spend much time on the 10 Commandments because we did a whole series on that not too long ago. You can go back and listen to that one if you need to. God will lay out the rules. They've already said, we will follow the rules. And they start out pretty good for a while. They start following pretty good. But then we start reading about times when they forgot about their promises and they walked away from God. And when they walked away from God, they lost out on the promises of God because they're tied together. God seldom lays it all out in advance. Instead, he asks us to trust him enough that we'll follow his commands, whatever they may be. I think God's asking the same thing of us today that he asked of the Israelites. He's asking for our trust and our commitment. Do we trust him enough to provide for us? Do we trust him enough to protect us? Do we trust him enough to keep us from harm? If we don't trust him, we can walk away and figure things out on our own. But if we do trust him, he says, if you trust me, then follow me wherever I lead. Do what I ask you to do, regardless of whether you understand it or whether you like it. Trust me enough to know that I will never let you down. You will have some tough times. The Israelites had many more tough times. They had times of testing. And part of that was God trying to see, do they really trust him? But if you trust me, I will make sure that you're never given more than you can bear. I will always provide a way out. I will always take care of you. If we do what we've committed to do, follow him, then God will do what he's promised to do, take care of us. If we don't, it's not that God's not trying to take care of us, it's that we have simply walked away. We said, God, I don't want you in my life. I want to do this on my own. And God's a gentleman. He won't force his way on us. If we live up to our end of the covenant, then God will take care of us. We can have confidence because we trust him and he is trustworthy. Will we trust him even when we don't know where he's leading? Will we trust him when the answers don't seem to make sense? Will we trust him when he asks us to do something that we don't really want to do? We all like to hold on to the promise in Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you and to bless you. We love to quote that back to God, throw that back in his face. And God says, I do have great plans for you. I do want to bless you. I do want to prosper you. But you have to choose to do it the way I've asked you to do it, because those things don't come unless you're following the commandments. His plans only come to pass when we trust him completely. And if we trust, we must obey, because his way is always the right way. I've asked the worship team to close us with a new song today that talks about trusting God, even when the answers don't come the way we think they should come, when they don't come quick enough. Do we trust God enough to know that he will bring the answer at the right time? Will we put our trust in him? Some of you will know this song. You've heard it on the radio. If you know, sing along. I will trust in you.